Let's go on the record. Picture this. You're scrolling on TikTok, it's 11 p.m., and suddenly you know with absolute certainty that your ex is a narcissist, your mom maybe has anxiety, and you definitely have ADHD. And this is all from a 30-second video with a trending audio. In a world where people self-diagnose faster than they can spell psychology, where your For You page has more authority than an actual therapist, and where your mental health labels become your entire personality before you even hit follow. We don't just receive labels anymore, we become them. We live in them. We build our entire identity around them. And honestly, it's destroying us. Today, we're going on the record about Gen Z's obsession with diagnosing everyone and everything, and why it's one of the most dangerous trends in our generation. Let me paint a picture for you of how insane this has gotten. You open social media and you're immediately hit with this. 5 signs you're dating a narcissist, 7 signs you have ADHD, and this one thought pattern means you have anxiety. Your parents did this? Oh, that's emotional neglect. Here's the terrifying part. Millions of people are watching these videos, they're nodding along, and they're walking away convinced that they've just figured out their entire psychological profile. There is no therapist required. There is no professional assessment needed. Just this 20-year-old with great lighting and a great hook. A 2022 Plush Care study found that nearly 84% of mental health advice on TikTok is misleading or inaccurate. But Gen Z is now increasingly turning to social media for mental health information instead of professional sources. What used to require months of therapy, professional testing, and careful evaluation, well, now it happens in less time than it takes to watch a dance trend. And we wonder why everybody's walking around just completely confused about who they are. There is psychology behind this. But here's what's really happening in our brains when we self-diagnose from social media. There are 4 psychological principles at work, and these are absolutely fascinating, but also a little bit terrifying. The first one is identity foreclosure. This is when you commit to an identity way too early. Like you've decided you have a mental health condition after one TikTok without exploring any other possibilities. Your brain is just like, yep, this is me now. The second is self-labeling bias. So once you pick a label, your brain becomes a detective and it looks for evidence to prove you right. So every mood swing becomes ADHD, every boundary becomes narcissism, every worry becomes clinical anxiety. The third is retrospective bias. So you literally rewrite memories in your past to fit this new label. And suddenly, the time your ex bought you flowers, well, that was definitely love bombing. And that argument with your mom becomes gaslighting. And that time that you felt sad becomes a depressive episode. And finally, narrative identity. And that label doesn't just describe you. This label, it becomes the main character of your life story. And everything that you do gets filtered through that lens. Social media algorithms, well, they are like the gas on this fire. And the more dramatic the diagnosis, well, the more views that it gets, the more extreme the label, the more engagement it drives. Here's the thing, healing doesn't necessarily go viral. The nuance doesn't trend. And the videos that are like, you might want to talk to somebody about this doesn't get a million likes. But the video that is titled, Your Mom is Definitely a Narcissist and Here's Why, it gets shared 10,000 times. Let's look at how this plays out in real life, because these examples are absolutely wild. Let me tell you about one of the most insane examples of mass public diagnosis social media has ever seen. During the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard trial, TikTok literally turned into a psychology convention, except none of the attendees actually had degrees. Picture this, millions of people sitting in their living rooms watching this trial footage, and suddenly everybody is a forensic psychologist. Creators were pausing videos, they were zooming in on facial expressions and delivering confident diagnoses. Look at that micro expression. Well, that's classic narcissistic rage. See how she touched her face there? That's definitely borderline personality disorder. Or, whoa, Notice how he deflected? That is definitely a trauma response. That wasn't opinion or analysis, this was diagnosis. And millions of people accepted it as fact before the jury had even deliberated. This whole thing was so wild that this literally spawned an entire documentary about how TikTok shaped the public opinion on a legal case. Think about that. A social media platform influenced a defamation trial. The living room became a courtroom and TikTok handed out the gavel. A lot of people understand narcissism, BPD, and trauma responses. Well, that now comes from these trials on TikTok, not from actual psychological education. By the way, speaking of TikTok, let's talk about the mental health side of the app because it is absolutely out of control. Now, we've got teenagers who have never taken a psychology class confidently explaining complex mental health conditions to millions of followers. I'm not saying all mental health content is bad. In fact, that is not the case at all. I think it's incredible. Some creators genuinely help people feel less alone. But when research is showing that nearly 84% of mental health advice on the platform is potentially misleading, and most TikTokers are dispensing this advice don't have relevant qualifications, well, we may have a serious problem. Studies show that 1 in 6 Gen Zers are now using TikTok as a search engine for information. So that includes mental health topics. What used to happen behind closed doors, the testing, the therapy, the nuanced understanding, well, it now happens by accident because the algorithm decided to show you a specific video at 2 a.m. And the comments on these videos, well, honestly, they're heartbreaking. There are thousands of people saying, OMG, this is so me, or I never realized I had this, or wow, everything clicks and now makes sense. And these aren't aha moments, and many of them are misdiagnoses that are happening in real time. It's not just social media. We're literally using fictional characters as psychological case studies. And I'm talking about everybody from your little sister to grown adults. Take Joffrey from Game of Thrones. He becomes this gold standard for malignant narcissism, or Blair Waldorf from Gossip Girl. She's become the textbook example of the main character syndrome. And even the Marvel villains like Loki, they get dissected for covert narcissistic traits. And every fictional character gets psychoanalyzed, and then we apply those character traits to real people in our lives. So if we see somebody who likes being the center of attention, we're like, ugh, total narcissist. Or we notice somebody who's strategic about the image, we're like, definitely manipulative. Or our friend cancels plans, we're like, oh, they're giving self-centered. We've really replaced empathy with now just diagnosing someone. So instead of trying to understand why somebody might be struggling, we just like slap a label on them and we call it a day. Even the music that we listen to is teaching us this stuff subconsciously. And there are studies that show that lyrics with the words I and me and my have absolutely skyrocketed in pop music over the last 20 years, while words like we and us have practically disappeared. Songs are reflecting and they're reinforcing this self-focused, individualistic mindset, and it's not just about personal expression anymore. This is about making everything about us all of the time. It's just about you. And when your soundtrack is constantly reinforcing self-focus, well, is it any wonder that we're seeing these narcissistic traits across the board increasing? Here's what the actual research shows, and it's pretty sobering. They're directly tied to social media addiction. This research on Gen Z shows correlations between the narcissistic traits and social media addiction, and also decreased life satisfaction. Here's the cycle. People with lower self-esteem turn to social media for validation. Social media feeds them content about diagnosing themselves or others. They then adopt these labels as their identity. Their self-esteem is getting worse because they're living in these limiting boxes. So they turn back to social media for validation, and it's like this psychological hamster wheel where millions of people are getting trapped in it. Speaking of labels, but the good kind, let me tell you about today's sponsor, Lumia Label. Look, we've just spent 10 minutes talking about how we're obsessed with psychological labels, but you know what kind of labels are actually fun and don't require therapy to figure out? The ones from Lumia Label, they make you feel amazing. Lumia Label are blue light glasses, and there's 3 interchangeable lenses in blue, yellow, and black. And by the way, guys, you can use the code on the record for 20% off your first order at lumialabel.com. That is lumialabel.com with the code on the record. Because the truth is, the only label that you need is one that makes you feel confident and beautiful. Back to the psychological labels that are actually causing problems. Let's talk about the real costs. Here's what's really breaking my heart about this trend is that we've turned healing into branding. And pain has become this part of people's identity instead of something that we process and then we move through. Our trauma is becoming our aesthetic. Our mental health struggles are now becoming our content. Our diagnosis now becomes our whole personality. And here's the twisted part. The algorithm rewards you for staying broken. Think about it. The title, I'm healing from narcissistic abuse, well, that's going to get way more engagement than I work through my relationship issues and I'm doing a lot better now. Recovery doesn't trend. Breakthrough doesn't necessarily go viral, and growth for people is, well, it's boring. So people stay stuck in these labels because that is where validation lives, and that is where the community is, and that is where the content performs. We are losing our ability to empathize with each other. And when we can just easily diagnose someone's entire personality from one interaction, we then stop trying to understand them. It's like your mom had a bad day. It's like, oh, that must be narcissistic rage. Your friend has put up a boundary, you're like, classic manipulation. Or your partner needs space, you're like, this is definitely avoidant attachment. I recognize this. We have weaponized psychology. Instead of using these concepts to understand and help each other, we're now using them as ammunition and arguments and justification for just cutting people off. But here's the irony. The more that we diagnose others, the more that you risk developing the exact traits that you claim to see everywhere. When you are constantly looking for narcissism, when you're looking for manipulation, when you're looking for toxicity, you start seeing it even when it isn't there. And that level of suspicion and judgment, well, it isn't healthy. The biggest cost is what this does to our sense of self. So when you build your entire identity around a diagnosis you gave yourself after watching a TikTok, you get trapped in a very small box. You stop growing because growth means leaving that label behind you. You stop healing because healing means that this diagnosis wasn't accurate. You stop becoming who it was that you're actually called and meant to be because you're too busy trying to be who you think you are. And this is where we need to go off the record for just a second, because this isn't just about psychology. As always, it is about something much deeper. Let's talk about the spiritual reality. There is a difference between naming your struggle and absorbing a label as your identity. And I think that we've just completely lost sight of the difference between those two things. As someone of faith, I believe that God has called us beloved. He's called us redeemed. He's called us chosen, but we're choosing to live as broken, as toxic, and as disordered. When we make a psychological label more central to our identity than the identity that God gave us, well, we start living a lie. And the truth is this: we've replaced prayer with playlists. We've replaced scripture with stereotypes and movies, and we replace redemption with diagnosis, oftentimes misdiagnosis. The more that we diagnose others, the more that we risk hardening our hearts towards those people. We start seeing these other people as a collection of symptoms instead of a real soul created in the image of God. The algorithms, they don't heal, they addict. Now the fear, the drama, the diagnosis, these sell way more than peace, growth, or healing. And as a Christian, we have the Holy Spirit, right? He leads us towards truth, towards growth, towards becoming more like Christ. But the algorithm, well, that leads us towards more content, more addiction, and the very things that are really just keeping us stuck. We are not called to be pop psychologists. We're called to be peacemakers. We're called to speak the truth in love. We're not called to brand pain with hashtags. We're called to see people as God sees them, not as case studies for latest diagnoses. Here's the question that I want you to sit with, and it is this: who gets to define you? Is it a TikTok video? Is it a psychology trend? Is it the latest mental health aesthetic? Or is it the God who knit you together in your mother's womb, who has plans for you, who calls you by name? Guys, our identity is sacred. Do not let an algorithm have authorship of your soul. We need to anchor our identity in something that is so much deeper than a trending psychology topic, right? We are not our diagnosis. We are not our trauma. We are not our past. We are not our mental health struggles. And if you think that you might benefit from real professional help, please go get it. Go get real therapy, real assessment, and real growth. This has been Robbie on the record. All the links and sources, as always, are in the description. And by the way, guys, it is now your turn to grow on the record. So comment below, let me know what you think. What is a label that you have been carrying that maybe isn't serving you? What are you coming into agreement with? Or have you even caught yourself diagnosing someone else based on a TikTok you saw? I want to hear your honest thoughts about this. And remember this: you are so much more than a label.